So a deal might be valid. Valid means it's recognized by the lawmaker. The lawmaker is God. So a deal might be valid, like a marriage without mention of a dowry. Doing a marriage without mentioning a dowry, that's valid by consensus. So, for example, a man says to a groom, I give my daughter in marriage to you. He doesn't say for the dowry of such and such. He just says, I give my daughter in marriage to you, for example. And then the groom says, I accept your daughter in marriage in the presence of witnesses, the proper witnesses. That's valid by consensus, meaning what's valid by consensus is to not have a dowry mentioned in the contract. Although there's still going to be a dowry, though. Not mentioning the dowry in the marriage contract doesn't drop the dowry. It just makes us have to resort to other rules that we're not going to talk about now. There's still going to be a dowry, though. Now you're going to have to figure out what it is, since you didn't agree to it in the marriage contract. Or a deal might be invalid, like a sale with an expiration, or a marriage with an expiration. A sale with an expiration, that's not valid. You can't sell somebody something until a time and then it's not theirs anymore. That doesn't work. If you don't want it to stay theirs permanently, then tell me, what type of deal could you do? Yes, you could rent it. You could rent it to the person, for example. Or you can let him hold it with the condition that he just gives it back to you as you gave it to him. But you can't sell it to him temporarily. That's invalid. Or a marriage with an expiration. That's also invalid. That's basically prostitution right there. But there used to be something valid like that. Mut'ah was valid in the nation of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Allah revealed to the Prophet that a Muslim could do a contract with a woman that expires. He pays her dowry, and they're lawful for that time until it expires. And then without needing to divorce her or anything, just merely by the expiration of the time, they are no longer lawful for each other. Then that was abrogated. The need for that was the scarcity of Muslim women. That's what I learned. So then that was abrogated. And then it was made lawful again for a very short time. And then it was abrogated until Judgment Day, as the Messenger said. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Allah made mut'ah forbidden until Yawm al-Qiyamah. So it is forever forbidden until the end of the world. But the Shiites claim that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not forbid mut'ah. They claim that Umar ibn al-Khattab was the one who forbade mut'ah, and therefore it's still valid, and they practice it until today. Also, a usurious sale, a riba sale, that's going to be an invalid sale. We're going to get to riba in its place, but we're basically talking about here selling gold for gold or silver for silver with inequality on both sides. You can't sell gold for gold while you have more gold than the other side, or the other side has more gold than you. It doesn't matter the value of your gold and the value of his gold, because different golds might have different values. That doesn't matter here. When it's gold for gold, you have to sell it for the same weight on both sides of pure gold, not including any alloys in there. Like, you can't sell 24 karat gold, 1 kilo of 24 karat gold for 1 kilo of 18 karat gold. It's not valid. Well, here we're talking about the amount of pure gold. Right now we're talking about the amount of pure gold. You can't sell 24 karat, huh? Riba, yes, usury. Usury, usury. It's called a usurious sale. Usurious sale. You can't sell 24 carats, 1 kilo of 24 karat gold for 1 kilo of 18 karat gold, because even though it's a kilo on both sides, the amount of pure gold on both sides is different. So it's not valid. Same thing for silver. Has to be the same on both sides. Same thing if you're selling food for food. For the same type of food, I mean. Food for the same type of food. If you're selling food for the same type of food, then you can't sell one amount of some type of food for a different amount of the same type of food. That's invalid sale. That's riba. And it's a high major sin. Very high major sin. And there's other rules for riba sales. There's other rules for riba sales. We'll come to them when we get to that section, inshallah. But do you know who's very, very likely to fall into this type of riba? I don't know, because stock market, they're dealing with something virtual. We talk about stocks and things. You talk about things that don't have a physical presence. Incarcerated folks. Because a big amount of their currency or their money is food. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, if they're selling cigarettes or soap or clothing, that's different. But riba targets specifically gold, silver, and food. Yes. So what they're going to do, he's going to say, let me buy a bag of chips now for 2 bags next week. Invalid. That's an invalid sale, and they committed a major sin, both of them. Also, what's invalid sale? A debt for a debt. We already talked about that. Except in debt transfer. That's a case where a debt for a debt is not invalid. And also, what's another example of invalid sale? For someone who's restricted from his money, religiously restricted, to use his money, then his sale is going to be invalid. We're going to come to talk about those who are barred from their own money. But a simple example is a child, according to Ash-Shafi'i. A non-pubescent child, according to Ash-Shafi'i, is restricted from his money until he reaches puberty. And his parents cannot permit him, according to Ash-Shafi'i, to sell. So if a child takes his very own money that he owns and he goes to the store, according to Ash-Shafi'i that is, and he buys something, then this is invalid, according to Ash-Shafi'i. Because he's restricted from using his own money. This is invalid sale. The case of the mahjur, or the restricted one, or the barred one. The one who's barred from his own money. The one who's barred from dealing. There's some details there. Sometimes he might be able to deal in credit. So we're not going into all the details. This is just general picture here. Sale or purchase, which they're the same thing anyway. A sale and a purchase are exactly the same thing. The only thing that's different is the words in the contract. Once the child reaches puberty, if you were the child's guardian, any guard, whether that's your own child, you're the father, or you're just a guardian appointed over that child and you're controlling that child's money, once the child reaches puberty, the religious judgment is to hand over his money if he reached puberty maturely. Once he reached puberty maturely, you hand over his money. And if it's a boy, he can do a marriage contract on his own without you. He wouldn't need you to be his guardian. So the sale of the restricted one, and we're going to come to see more examples of that, inshallah, when we come to that section. Or when someone is unrightfully forced to sell, that sale is invalid. An example of being unrightfully forced is like the government wants your land and you don't want to sell it, and they tell you, listen, you're going to take this money and move, or you're going to take this money and move. And that's all there is about it. So then they give you the money and drive you out of your land. That's invalid. And then they bulldoze your house, for example. And that's like what happened to the houses that used to be around the Prophet's masjid. There were houses around the Prophet's masjid, private property, and people were forced out of their homes for the expansion of the masjid. So there's actually spots in the Prophet's masjid, what's called the Prophet's masjid, that you don't want to pray there. So if you're with someone who has knowledge, then inshallah that person would say, this area here, don't pray here. This area was unrightfully commandeered. This is an invalid sale. All of these right now, what we just mentioned, are invalid deals. So you have a valid sale and you have an invalid sale, or a valid deal and an invalid deal. Those are two types of deals. Let's go back to the valid deal. So now let's look at deals that are recognized by the lawmaker. There's still other judgments. Those can be broken into different judgments too. Because a valid deal could be obligatory or otherwise, might not be obligatory. Like an example of an obligatory deal is to sell or buy so that you could pay a due debt. We're talking here when we say to sell or buy so that you can pay a due debt. We're talking about you're able to part with this thing. That's why it's going to be obligatory on you. If you weren't able to part with it, then you're not obligated. Like if you have a car and you need that car, you can't do without it, then you're not going to be obligated to sell it. Even if it were a slave. Even if you had a slave, but you needed that slave, you wouldn't be obligated to sell that slave for this reason. So what we're basically saying is you have a debt that's due. It's obligatory on you. You actually, and let's say you don't have the cash per se, but you do have assets that you could liquidate so that you could pay that debt and it's due. You're obligated. It's because basically it's like you have the money. You just got to put a little effort so you can pay your debt. Or for obligatory support. A man has to support his wife. He has to support his non-pubescent children, for example. So in the case he doesn't, let's say, have the cash, but he has excess that he could sell so that he could get the cash, then he would be obligated. If that's his only way. If that's his only way, he'd be obligated. He might have other ways. He might say, I could sell this stuff here, or I could go out and hustle, a halal hustle, of course, and just get the money I need and not sell my stuff. Whatever, as long as he fulfills his obligation. Or to perform Hajj, an obligatory Hajj, is, as far as assets are concerned, you have your estate makes you able to perform Hajj. But let's say you just don't have the cash to pay for a ticket, but you got the estate that makes you able to afford Hajj, then you need to sell something so that you can perform that Hajj. You'd be obligated. Or so that you could pay your dowry to your wife. You married a woman and now you owe her a dowry. Then if what needs to be done to pay that dowry is to sell something of yours, then you're going to have to sell it. Now there's, yes? Okay. there's details about when the complete dowry becomes obligatory. Like if you consummate it. If you consummated that marriage, then for sure, the complete dowry will be obligatory on you. When it's due, that depends on how y'all agree, whatever y'all agreed on. If you agreed that it's due immediately, then it's due immediately. If you agreed that it's not due for 6 months or a year or whatever, then that's when it's due. If you agreed that it's supposed to be paid in installments, then that's what you have to do. Whatever you agreed on. Or if this wife of yours died, you have to pay the complete dowry, meaning that has to go to her heirs. You're going to say to her family, I have her dowry. I'm going to submit this money to you, to the family, to put it into her inheritance. And then you guys are going to split it according to the proper religious rules. And by the way, side note, if you're dealing with a dead Muslim, be mindful, don't throw his stuff away. Put it into his belongings that get distributed with the inheritance. Sometimes Muslims would be, he's dead Muslim, he died with his flip-flops on. And maybe has a rubber band around his wrist or something. Allahu A'lam, what's there. So don't throw his stuff away. Put it to be distributed. Also, what else you'd be obligated to pay? You're obligated to pay the reconciliation payment if you divorce the woman after consummating. You consummated the marriage and then you divorced her, you have to pay her something. So that's going to be an obligatory spending there. So if the only way to pay that obligation is to sell something of yours, you're going to be obligated to sell it so that you could pay her something. There's no particular price there, something you need to pay her. So you might say to her, all right, I divorced you, I owe you a payment. Do you accept for me to give you this $100, for example? Or something. You want this car that I have? You can have this car of mine. I have to pay you something. I got a car here. You want it? Or like that. And lending when one neither wants to give a charity to an impoverished Muslim who needs to cover his nakedness, nor to sell him by credit. Meaning, what's another case where you need to spend? It's obligatory on you. Well, here, Yani, we're going to say lend. Which is the case, you found a Muslim who doesn't have enough clothes to cover his awrah. He or she can't cover their religious nudity. That's how poor they are. So now you're not allowed to leave them like that. So what are your options here? What you're obligated to do. You're obligated here, if you want, give them a charity. Say, take this clothing and cover yourself. Or you can loan it to him. You could say, use these clothings of mine. You can use this. Cover yourself. I'll take these clothes back later. Or if you don't want to do any of that, you can say, I'll sell you this clothing. You can pay me later. But the point here is you can't leave them like that. When you're able to, of course. So those are some cases of obligatory deals. Obligatory deals. There are also recommended deals, like a settlement. Settlement, and that's a very important deal to know. Settlement is like a keystone deal you always want to have on deck, because the settlement is the type of deal that allows you to jump between deals. Meaning your original deal was a sale. but something went wrong. So you make a settlement and you turn it into a rental. Or vice versa. Or all kinds of deals. Your original deal was some kind of a deal. Something went wrong there, and then you make a settlement properly religiously, and you can, by way of settlement, turn that into or enter into a different type of deal. Or you could just change the conditions of the original deal. So this type of a deal, a settlement, that's a deal in itself, that's a recommended deal because this is something that squashes problems. Allah says in the Quran, وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ, settlement is good. Yes. So settlement is a type of deal that allows you to jump between deals. So that's very important. Meaning that you're not going to be necessarily stuck in some deal that you did and you can't change the parameters of it. Sometimes you would be stuck and you just got to deal with that. But if all the conditions are fulfilled there, you could do a settlement actually. And then that will enable you to get out of the original deal that went bad, for example, and then get into a new deal so that you could extinguish the problem. So when we get to that section, we'll talk about it. Excuse me. Insha'Allah ta'ala. So settlement is a recommended deal. A recommended type of a deal. Also, a marriage for a man who has desire, sexual desire, and he can afford it. If he has sexual desire and he can afford marriage, then it's recommended for him to get married. Or for a religious benefit, it would be recommended for him to get married. Like, maybe his marriage would unify families. Maybe she'll become a Muslim and learn if he married her. So getting married for a religious benefit, then it's going to be recommended. Also, what's recommended? An easy dowry, for a woman to request an easy dowry for the man to pay. And also, some deals that help others, those are recommended, like safekeeping. Somebody needed you to hold something for him. You say, hey, hold this piece for me while I go on the run, for example. So then you held it for him. You could correct your intention there and tell him, may Allah protect you. And then you hold it for him. And then inshallah, he'll come back one day and say, hey, you got that? And you're like, yeah, here it is right here. Or lending items, just letting someone hold something so that he could use it and give it back to you. That's recommended because that helps another person. And giving interest-free loans. Someone asks you for a loan, then it's recommended if you're able to give them the loan without interest because that's helpful. And accepting a debt transfer. Debt transfer requires 3 dealers, A, B, and C. B is transferring A to C. A owes B, B owes C. B, if all the conditions are there, religious conditions, then B could transfer A to C with C's acceptance. A's acceptance doesn't matter because he owes money anyway. But if C accepts, then B can transfer A to him. So it's recommended for C to accept because that's helpful. And you have also disliked deals. Disliked deals like selling and buying in the masjid. Disliked means diminished or no reward. Diminished reward or no reward. Like selling and buying in the masjid. It's valid, but disliked. Better to go out of the masjid to do that, to conduct your business. Or spending suspicious money. Spending suspicious money. That's disliked. Suspicious money means it could be haram, but you don't have proof that it is. Like someone has a halal job and a haram job. So he earns lawful money on one end and he earns unlawful money in another end. Let's say his side hustle is that he sells alcohol or something. So then he gives you money. So then you don't know where this money came from, let's say. You know, though, that he does have haram money, but you don't know. The money he just gave you now, is it haram or halal? You don't know. So it's suspicious money. Then it's not haram to take that money. And it's not haram to spend it. But it's disliked. But you want to be mindful here. We talk about suspicious money, then that means really, especially in our situation, in non-Muslim society, a lot of the money floating around is suspicious money. If I go to the supermarket, maybe the guy right in front of me, he just bought haram meat, for example, and he gave money to the cashier. Then I'm going to come right behind him and take change from the cashier. I don't know, what is this money? Is this the same money that the guy in front of me who just bought pork, who just paid for pork, or it's not? So some of the very, very, very pious scholars, especially in those old days, they used to not even go to markets like that. If they knew that in a market there was halal stuff and haram stuff, they wouldn't go to anywhere in that whole market. Our situation doesn't afford us to be able to do that, though, easily. One pious man, he heard about someone who did a deal somewhere or somehow so that maybe he took some money or he subjected himself to some suspicious money. So then that pious man, he made a comment. So someone said to him, but don't you know that such and such market, you go there, that market has haram stuff there. And then when they told him that, he fainted. And then he woke up. It was said about him, he started eating bread only. That's how much he fears Allah. He doesn't want to deal with any, even suspicious money. He doesn't want to deal with it. So he started eating bread only. And they said by the time he died, he was skin and bones. So spending suspicious money, that's disliked. Also, marriage for someone who lacks desire or lacks the funds. Someone doesn't have the sexual desire for marriage. And he doesn't have the funds, though he might have the desire. Then it's disliked for him to get married so that he doesn't get himself into responsibilities that he can't bear. Or expectations also that he can't fulfill. Also disliked is serial marriage for sexual experience, that is. Serial marriage for the sake of sexual experience. That means just getting married to have sex and then getting divorced from that situation and then do it again and again and again and again for the experience. Then that's disliked. It's not haram. It's not haram. This again, a non-Muslim, for example, would dispraise that. Say you're getting married and then you're getting divorced and then you're getting married. Someone might even say, that's as bad as fornicating. No, it's not at all. It's not fornicating. Not at all. That's being married. You just didn't do it under your standards. He did it for obeying his Lord. He did it so that he wouldn't be committing a major sin. He or she. That major sin that that non-Muslim doesn't care about. Also disliked is a divorce without a religious reason. Without a religious reason, like she's a good Muslim woman. She prays, she has knowledge. For example, she's faithful, etc. He doesn't have any religious reason to divorce her, and he does. So that's disliked, not haram. And as for forbidden deals, but it's valid though, forbidden, but it's valid. If you were to do it, it would be valid, but you'll be sinful for doing it, even though it's valid. That's like selling defective merchandise without exposing the defect. Selling defective merchandise without exposing the defect. So, for example, someone's selling carpets out of his van. So if he claims those carpets are Persian and really they're Chinese, then the sale is valid. If someone bought that, the sale is valid. But it's haram for him to sell that defective item. It became defective here because he sold it under falsehood. Meaning here, the defect is the value. So, like that. Yani, when we talk about defective items, we're talking about that it doesn't work right, or something's missing, it's less than it's supposed to be, or it's not worth as much as it's supposed to be. It's supposed to have a certain value in the first place, and it's not worth the value that it's supposed to have, then that's a defect in itself. So, yes. Yeah. So, like selling defective merchandise without exposing the defect. So, if you want to sell your defective merchandise, you need to say, but here, let me show you here. This product here has a problem here. Like how people sell clothing sometimes, it's imperfect. Maybe one cuff is tighter than the other cuff or something, but they still want to sell it. So they have to let you know what the defect is, and that's valid. Not exposing the defect is haram. Also, selling something that's pure and beneficial to someone who will use it to sin. Something pure and beneficial. Like, Yani, selling something that could be sold, in other words. Selling something that's sellable religiously. There's nothing that makes it by itself something that can't be sold. Like wood. Like grapes. Like knives. All those are things that religiously, fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with selling knives. But if you know you're selling that to someone who wants to go and assault people, or you're selling that to someone who wants to make wine with it, then it's haram. Still valid sale though. Still a valid sale, but you committed a sin by selling it to someone while knowing he wants to use it to sin. Or selling after the second adhan on Friday for the unexcused male. The male who has no excuse and he's obligated to go to Jumu'ah, then he can't sell or buy after the second adhan. That's haram, but it's valid. Yes, if a man is obligated to go to Jumu'ah, he doesn't have an excuse to be able to skip Jumu'ah, then it's haram to sell after the second adhan on Friday for the unexcused male until the prayer is done. The prohibition of selling is from the second adhan until the salam of the imam. Then you can sell again as a man, not the woman. She doesn't have to go to Jumu'ah. But it's going to be valid though, even if he sold during that haram time or bought during that haram time. It's valid, but that's haram. Or another thing that's haram, but it's valid, is marrying another wife while knowing that you're unable to do your obligations. So if you just did the marriage contract, it's going to be valid. She's your wife now. Now what you're going to do? You can't even afford her. Now what you're going to do when she wants her obligation, when she wants her rights. Also, what's forbidden but valid? Divorcing one's wife in the improper way. Divorcing the wife in the improper way. Divorcing her in the improper way means divorcing her while she's menstruating. There's two cases. Divorcing her improperly has two cases. One, divorcing her while she's menstruating. That's valid. It's a valid divorce. She's divorced, but that's haram. And the other way, the second way of improperly divorcing is to divorce her not while she's menstruating. She's not menstruating, but you had sexual intercourse with her during this clean time. So, in other words, if you wanted to divorce a woman who menstruates, then what you have to do is wait for her period to go off. And then while she's not menstruating, don't have intercourse with her. And then while she's not menstruating and you didn't have intercourse with her, you can divorce her. So if you had intercourse with her while she's not menstruating and you wanted to divorce her, then you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait for her period to come on and go back off, and then don't have intercourse with her and then divorce her. But if you did divorce her in the inappropriate way, it's still a valid divorce, but it's haram. So here, in this case of what's forbidden, you should just know that usually a forbidden sale is invalid, usually. But like we just saw, there are cases when something would be forbidden, but it's still valid. And as a rule, spending money sinfully is a major sin. Spending money sinfully is a major sin.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك